And we are going to start momentarily.
Oh, yeah, there's like, and like right now, I don't know if the TV lights are up, right? We just went in there random shot. You put a slate up for like close. It's, I can see how it.
Good afternoon, everyone. The hearing will now come to order. I want to welcome everyone to this hybrid hearing on the jurisdiction, investigation, and prosecution of sexual harassment and sexual assault in the National Guard. We will have one panel today with General Daniel Hokasan, Chief of the National Guard Bureau, and Brigadier General Charles Walker, Director of the Office of Complex Investigations. Both will discuss the jurisdiction of the National Guard Bureau, the Army National Guard, and the Air Force National Guard over guardsmen in their varying statuses who commit sexual harassment and sexual assault or other criminal acts. They will also address what services and benefits are available to National Guard personnel who are victims of these egregious crimes. Brigadier General Walker will also discuss the Office of Complex Investigations and their role in filling a gap for the state adjutant generals when local law enforcement authorities and/or federal agencies are unable or unwilling to investigate. I'm also looking forward to hearing from them their response to the findings of the Independent Review Committee and how the National Guard Bureau intends to implement the IRC's recommendations. The morale, the readiness, and every aspect of service is poisoned each time a service member is sexually assaulted or sexually harassed in our military. The National Guard is no different. Guard personnel have fought in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, aided countless civilians in natural disasters, and are providing essential health care and support to fight the current COVID-19 pandemic. Yet, they suffer from a convoluted and understaffed system of sexual assault and sexual harassment prevention programs, complex and cumbersome reporting processes, and a lack of justice. The numbers are staggering, yet the data is lacking. According to the DoD 2019 annual report on the sexual assault in the military, the number of reported sexual assaults in the Guard jumped nationwide from 173 in 2009 to 607 in 2019, more than a 300% increase. Beyond that, little data exists. I've been advocating for progress for more than 10 years. Those numbers don't tell even a fraction of the story. The individual stories of Guard personnel caught in a web of confusing bureaucracy are harrowing. Stories like the West Virginia Army National Guard officer, then Lieutenant Colonel Teresa James, who was raped in her hotel room by a superior officer, consistently disbelieved and retaliated against until the National Guard Bureau investigators finally found that the perpetrator, quote, used intimidation and fear to sexually assault her, resulting in non-consensual intercourse, unquote. To make matters worse, and because she reported her superior officer for rape, the victim was given an uncharacteristically low evaluation and retained in the Guard for 1 year instead of the standard 2 years. 3 years later, the DoD Inspector General found that the, quote, the West Virginia Guard retaliated against her for reporting that she was raped, unquote. Her perpetrator faced no charges and was allowed to go on to endanger other guardsmen. Lieutenant Colonel James waited years to be believed and then was medically discharged from the service for PTSD resulting from her sexual trauma. Stories like this one are all too common across the National Guard. Extensive reporting by journalists has uncovered problems with sexual assault and sexual harassment in the National Guard in many states, including Florida, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Wisconsin, many involving botched investigations and failure to report sex crimes to police. We are here today to pull back the curtain that has allowed this insidious rot that threatens our national security and countless lives to go unchecked, and in the worst cases, made the threat even more dire. No longer can the National Guard hide behind their unique status. To the National Guard, the spotlight of Congress is on you. Take care of your soldiers, take care of your airmen, stamp out sexual harassment and assault, stop the retaliation. We are watching. To all the soldiers and airmen of the National Guard, we have not forgotten you. My pledge to all the survivors of military sexual violence, to those who reported and were ostracized, to those who reported and faced retaliation, and to all those who are afraid to report and may be suffering alone. We're on your team. And the National Guard is on notice. Sexual assault and harassment will not be tolerated. We pay your bills. We fund you. The game is over. Ranking Member Gallagher, you're now recognized for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we begin, I'd like to say I look forward to working with you through this upcoming NDAA cycle. Last year was a whirlwind, but I hope we can continue to attack our military personnel challenges in a bipartisan fashion. And I want to thank the witnesses for joining us. Yeah, I agree that sexual assault and harassment are a blight on our armed forces, be they active, reserve, or guard. So this is a very important hearing about the National Guard Bureau's effort to coordinate with states and bring federal resources to bear on tough cases. Now, the National Guard sits in a very interesting position, which makes this a complex issue. Very few Guard members are in a federal service status and subject to the military justice system at any time, unless they are actually activated under Title X orders. They're in their communities doing civilian jobs and are thus subject to the same laws as everyone else. So for the overwhelming majority of Guard members, these legal distinctions never cause any issue. But criminal conduct or conduct unbecoming a member of our armed forces does happen, often entirely outside of any federal jurisdiction, and Guard members live under 54 different sets of state or territorial laws. Now, Congress has charged the National Guard Bureau and the Office of Complex Investigations with assisting the adjutants general in cases where local law enforcement can't or won't address a Guard-related crime. And since 2012, OCI has helped fill the gap between state and local law enforcement criminal investigations and the high standards that we apply to our service members. These cases often deal with complex legal issues, and the OCI has worked very hard to find solutions over the last 10 years. As always, there is more we could do to improve accountability and integrity in our armed forces, and I look forward to hearing from the witnesses about what tools would actually improve the handling of sexual assault cases at OCI and how exactly the Guard Bureau can better provide crime prevention resources to the states. Thank you. I yield back.
After General Hokanson's remarks, each member will have an opportunity to question the witnesses for 5 minutes. We respectfully ask the witnesses to summarize their testimony. Forgive me, I'll start again. After General Hokanson's remarks, each member will have an opportunity to question the witnesses for 5 minutes. We respectfully ask the witness to summarize their testimony in 5 minutes. Your written comments and statements will be made part of the hearing record. Let's begin and welcome our panel, General Daniel Hokanson, Chief of the National Guard Bureau, and Brigadier General Charles Walker, the Director of Office of Complex Investigations. Thank you both for being here today, and we look forward to hearing from you. Please begin, General Hokanson. You may have to unmute yourself. Can you hear us, General? Can you give us a thumbs up if you can hear us? Okay, but we can't hear you, so why don't we move on to Brigadier General Charles Walker, and maybe in the interim you can get your technology figured out there. Have someone on your staff help you. All right. Brigadier General Walker.
Chair Spear, Ranking Member Gallagher, and all the distinguished members of the subcommittee, it's my pleasure to be here today and offer testimony with respect to what the Office of Complex Investigations brings to this. As Chair Spear points out, it is a poison within our ranks. And the National Guard at all levels is committed to eradicating sexual violence against all service members. Today, we hope to testify about the unique, particular aspects of National Guard service, which at times may create gaps in our ability to handle criminal activity within our military service, but also to reinforce the fact that these matters are being taken serious and that the avenues that are available for military justice, and I'll use that not as the term of art military justice, but the fact that guards, men and women who are serving in a non-federalized capacity are serving as citizen soldiers and airmen, which entitles them to the same protections as any other citizen within their community, which is why local law enforcement and local prosecutors are our avenue for handling criminal activity in the National Guard. Certainly, General Hokinson's opening statement covers the gamut of activities and situations within the Guard that are subject to this hearing, and I hope that he'll be on shortly so that he can elaborate on those things. My limited scope is as Director of the Office of Complex Investigations, which if this is the appropriate time, I can go into the details about the Office of Complex Investigation in the hopes that General Hokinson can come on board and give the opening statement that does justice to exactly where the National Guard is coming to you today on this issue. But as has already been pointed out in Ranking Member Gallagher's opening, the Office of Complex Investigation began in 2012 and is a direct outgrowth of the last time that Congress was intimately involved with the military and the issues of sexual assault. Back in 2012, there were a number of cases in which military members had complained, and rightfully so, about the handling of the investigations and the lack of results with prosecutions related to their sexual assault cases. As a result of that, DOD instructions and DOD guidance was promulgated, which required that commanders no longer use their indigenous or organic resources to investigate sexual assaults, and that all sexual assault allegations would be referred to military criminal investigative organizations, such as the Office of Special Investigation for the Active Duty Air Force, or CID, the Criminal Investigation Division for the Army. But unlike those active and reserve components that serve under Title 10, Guardsmen and women do not have access to that due to their service in non-federalized status. So to fill that gap, we created the Office of Complex Investigation, which would help in instances where local law enforcement, which is our first line of defense against sexual violence allegations, is either unwilling or unable to investigate thoroughly those allegations. In those limited instances, the Office of Complex Investigation steps in and provides an investigative tool for the 54 adjutants general. These investigations include only sexual assault allegations, but we're using the Department of Defense definition for sexual assault, which is very broad and encompassing everything from a groping all the way towards a penetrative sexual assault. We in the Office of Complex Investigation are a centralized asset, primarily based out of Andrews Air Force Base. We provide investigative capacity, which will allow us to provide, one, a consistent ability and an ability to provide a fair and balanced report back to the state adjutant general for administrative action. And that's a nuance that I have to point out. We are not a criminal investigative organization. We provide administrative investigations as a backstop so that victims and the National Guard will have an opportunity to address sexual violence against its members and to remove those within our ranks who may be perpetrators in an administrative context. What we are not is a criminal context, which, as you know, in a criminal setting, there's jail time potentially, there's sexual registries, and other controls that our society has deemed appropriate for these type crimes. So OCI is not the default for the National Guard. It is merely the avenue that we resort to when local law enforcement is unable or unwilling for a variety of circumstances to adequately investigate those instances of sexual violence. And at this time, I will end my statements in hopes that General Hokanson can carry forward with his more broad opening statement, which encompasses all aspects of what the National Guard is doing with respect to eradicating sexual violence within our force.
Thank you, Brigadier General. General Hokanson, are you live now?
Chair Spear, we started. Can you hear me now?
We certainly can. Please proceed.
Oh, outstanding. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Spear, Ranking Member Gallagher, and honorable members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting General Walker and I to testify before you today. In case you have not heard it directly from me already, I want to make it clear there is no place for sexual assault or sexual harassment in our nation's armed forces, or anywhere else for that matter. There is no act more heinous than violating the trust and well-being of a fellow soldier, airman, or anyone. The women and men who serve in our formations raised their right hand, took an oath to the Constitution, and stepped forward to fight our nation's wars and serve our communities in times of crisis. We owe them strong leadership at every level, and we owe them a workplace free from the violence of assault and harassment. This is a serious problem, and we recognize it as such. That is why, shortly after becoming the chief of the National Guard Bureau, I met with our team because despite all our efforts, we didn't seem to be making a difference. As a result, I ordered the formation of a task force composed of National Guard Bureau leaders and representatives from our 54 states, territories, and DC to focus on preventing sexual assault and suicide within our ranks. Over the course of the next 6 months, as a result of the task force in-depth examinations, we identified 19 recommendations to improve our guardsmen's safety. These recommendations fall into 6 strategic areas: leader education, growing a healthy culture, resource distribution and communication, partnerships, standardization of efforts, and effective measurement. Upon review of their recommendations, I accepted all of them. Taken together, they mean one thing above all. We need a greater focus on prevention to eliminate sexual assault and harassment in our formations. In addition, we are strongly engaged in the implementation of Secretary Austin's Independent Review Commission recommendations to help improve our prevention programs tailored to the National Guard's unique operating environment and continue to enhance victim care and support. It was evident from our task force that prevention starts with creating a culture of trust. Our guardsmen and their families must have confidence in their chain of command. They need to have confidence in our victim advocacy and response services. They need to have confidence in the offices that investigate sexual assault, and they need to have confidence that offenders will be held accountable. We have to earn that confidence by establishing and maintaining a culture of trust in every state, territory, and DC, and at every level of leadership. We are taking action on building that culture of trust and preventing sexual assault and harassment in our ranks. We are working on ways to help states with better guidance and resources and analyzing data that focuses on risk factors so we can directly affect those risk factors. In addition to the Sexual Assault and Suicide Task Force, I also made changes to our Office of Complex Investigations, or OCI. These changes included moving OCI from under our General Counsel office and making it a separate, standalone directorate. I also placed a general officer in charge, and as we often do in the National Guard, we are leveraging General Chuck Walker's civilian experience as a federal judge in that capacity. In addition, we worked together with our adjutants general to increase the number of OCI investigators by 60%, which helped to substantially reduce their case backlog and help survivors get results. We're also working with the adjutants general to hire violence prevention integrators as resources become available. These officers are responsible for assessing their state guard sexual assault response programs. Having a properly trained, professionalized force focused on addressing this issue helps demonstrate our commitment to eliminating sexual assault and harassment in the National Guard. We're also improving prevention training for Guard members and leaders at every level in our organization. In addition to better training, we're also finding ways to hold leaders accountable for the culture they create and oversee. We know the work of preventing sexual assault and harassment is a challenging process, but it is of the utmost importance. When we eliminate sexual assault and harassment, we create a safe environment where soldiers and airmen can focus on their jobs, which improves our readiness and with it, our ability to fight and win America's wars. Our commitment to preventing sexual assault and harassment in the National Guard is fundamental to taking care of our soldiers, airmen, and their families, and is a requirement for the National Guard to keep its promise to be always ready, always there. Members of the subcommittee, thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. Let me start off by asking you, General Hokanson, what part of the Independent Review Commission's recommendations have you not implemented?
Chair Spear, we actually have not implemented any at this time. We're working very closely with the services, both the Army and the Air Force, to look at the implementation guidance and what is required to implement each of those. When you look at the over 80 recommendations from our analysis so far, over 50 of those apply directly to the National Guard, and many of those do require resources that we currently don't have to implement. So working at implementing guidance with our services, both the Army and the Air Force, to identify those resources so we can implement them as soon as possible.
So let me ask you this. Is there any process by which you are informed when a sexual harassment or sexual assault case complaint has been filed within the State National Guard?
Yes, ma'am. So if you look at our directors of the Army Guard and the Army National Guard, they are required to be notified within 24 hours of a case. And if I can really just take a step back to look at what the unit commander's responsibility is. And so they have to be notified within the first 24 hours of a sexual assault within their organization. And they immediately link that individual up with a victim advocate to ensure that they get the care and help that they need.
All right, let me ask you this. Lieutenant Colonel James, who was raped by her superior in the West Virginia Guard, she was retaliated against. The Inspector General was able to determine that. She ended up leaving after 1 year, and she had post-traumatic stress disorder. According to the IG report, her assailant was never charged and continued to serve. Do you know who this person is, and is he still serving?
No, Chair Spear, I do not know that, but I can get with our staff to make sure that we get a full accounting from the state of West Virginia.
All right, so you're going to report back to the committee about the status of the perpetrator and what happened. All right,
yes, Chair. Absolutely.
Let me ask Brigadier General, the do you have, you've seen an increase in the number of cases that have come to your attention recently. Do you have enough staff to respond to those cases?
Well, thank you, Chair Spear. And again, it's every year it seems to be a moving target on the number of cases. Obviously, with the renewed and enhanced ability to actually intake cases, we've seen a jump in cases, particularly this fiscal year. We're running definitely ahead of what we had historically in any year already. We do have enough staff to investigate these cases.
How many staff members do you have?
We have 29 dedicated investigators that are either resident at Joint Base Andrews or residing in their home states as remote investigators. all of whom we pair in teams of 2 to go out and investigate any allegation that we receive from an adjutant general.
And how
So
many cases did you have filed last year?
last year, I believe we had a total of 145 cases that OCI that we opened as OCI investigations.
Do you track the serial offenders?
We absolutely do. We track all perpetrators within our database so that if we get indications from any new cases of any repeat offenders, we're able to identify those and report back to the states and then do further analytics on why, in fact, someone would be a serial offender given our current system, which allows us to investigate sexual assaults, at least administratively. So we are tracking statistically those.
Could you please provide the
demographic
committee
information.
with that, how many serial predators you have?
Absolutely.
All right. My understanding is, through news reports, that the Guard has undertaken a number of changes to address its handling of incidents of sexual assault, including better training, increased transparency, and more emphasis on prevention. Among the changes to better support local units, train people, and hold leaders accountable, the Bureau's Office of Complex Investigations was reorganized. However, a basic internet search for information on OCI provides no publicly available information about the office, its purposes, and how to contact OCI officials. So how does OCI ensure that members of the National Guard, including those involved in or conducting investigations, are aware of the office's existence?
Well, Chair Spear, the adjutants general, and that's what triggers an Office of Complex Investigation.
No, but we want to make sure the
from
victims know that there is somewhere to go, and there's no place that they can Google on the internet to find out about your office.
Well, and again, our office is not the primary focus. If a crime has been committed and a sexual assault allegation, the first line of contact is with local law enforcement. And that's one of those nuances. The Office of Complex Investigation does not get involved until local law enforcement has either declined or is unable to investigate. Then the determination of whether an OCI investigation is appropriate is done with a request from the Adjutant General, of which we coordinate with the state and then open a case for investigation. So for victims,
did you investigate Lieutenant Colonel James's complaint?
No, we did not.
And
to
why
my
not?
knowledge, based on the timing, I'm not sure that the office was available at that time as a resource. So I can verify that, but obviously I'm unaware at this time specifically if her case was investigated by our office. Based on the fact that I've read some in the press about her situation, the timing of her case may have been outside the OCI window in which that would have been an avenue for her. And again, we would only do an administrative investigation. No matter when that case was filed, it would have been subject to a local criminal investigation and a prosecution outside of military channels. So I can get all the background information on that and we'll report back on all those details.
Great, thank you. My time has expired substantially. Mr. Gallagher, you're recognized for an additional 2 minutes.
General Hoganson, what is the sort of day-to-day reality of your communication and cooperation with the tags, the adjutants general, on this issue? Do you think most of them understand the importance of these cases?
Congressman Gallagher, and I would say that all of our adjutants general understand the importance of this across the entire formation. And when you look at my communications with the adjutants general, since I became the chief, I have a call with them every single week where we discuss any issues across the organization. And previously, some of those related to this have been the education and training of our SARC and SHARP personnel. And we were able to address that right away through our personnel branch and training. And so I have a touch point every single week with the adjutants general. And then 3 times a year, we all get together as a group, usually in person, although virtually the last couple of times, and have a guard senior leader conference where each of our staff gets updates. And part of that usually includes our sexual assault and sexual harassment programs. And then in addition to that, throughout the year, I go to specific regions so we can meet in a smaller group and have conversations about regional issues that tags are facing. And anytime it's something like that, we'll make sure that we've got representatives to address any sexual assault or sexual harassment issues. And lastly, on a daily basis, the National Guard Bureau staff and both the Director of the Army Guard and the Air Guard are in constant communication with the 54 states, territories, and DC. And specifically, when I tell the Adjutants General, I respond by email or phone call within 24 hours anytime one of them reaches out to me to ensure that there is no delay in any support or any concerns that they may have in any way that we can provide support.
Thank you. As I read your testimony, I think the biggest theme or takeaway I have from it is this emphasis on prevention, how prevention is key. Just based on your experience with this issue, what lines of effort for prevention do you think are most promising? Where do you think would be smart for us to invest more in terms of prevention activities?
Well, Congressman, I think one of the best ways is to make sure that we have the resources to have the trained personnel at the right level to really train and work with our leadership at every level, from the lowest level to the highest level. And part of that is making sure that our training actually has an impact where we're not just talking to people, but it's interactive and we meet the intent of what that education is intended to do. And frankly, it's not just making sure that we follow the rules, but teaching others that respect is both ways. We have to have basically an environment which flourishes with dignity and respect, and it's got to be safe. And we have to encourage anyone that's there, whether in the chain of command or not. And we call this bystander intervention. Everyone needs to be aware of what sexual assault and harassment is, and we want to encourage everyone to take action if they see this occurring at any time.
I appreciate that. Sort of a related question for Brigadier General Walker. You know, now that we have a decade of experience with OCI, what are your resource constraints? Do you feel like you have enough investigators to meet the demand from states right now?
Well, thank you. And really, the resource issue has ironically taken care of itself to some extent in the recent amendments to the NDAA, which historically OCI had operated with members who were on what in essence is temporary duty at OCI, which were limited in the number of years in which they could serve outside of their states. We've just gotten relief from that in that we can now have members up to 5 years, and we're implementing that as policy now within the Guard Bureau, waiting for service direction on that. And that will go a long way to us keeping our trained investigators. The more trained an investigator is, the higher volume of cases they can investigate. So it's obviously advantageous to keep people there longer. In addition to that, one of the things that General Hokanson also has done is now we have civilian resources. So we have hired 4 full-time civilian investigators and plan to hire several more, such that we'll have that, what I'll call a backbone of experienced investigators that will be the continuity within our organization to either train new people or to provide that leadership base that we need as people rotate in and out for their tours at OCI on the military side. So from a resource perspective, in the last year that General Hokanson's been on board, we've made great strides into ensuring that this is an enduring mission that's sustainable without absolutely relying on merely volunteers from the field who are here for a limited period of time. So as I sit here today, with the caseload that we have, we can meet the investigative burden that we have. However, that again is a moving target depending on the number of cases we get if there were to be some significant change in the volume. But as of today, OCI is meeting the demand based off the personnel that we have.
Well, my time has expired, but it's good to note what sounds like sort of cautious optimism that you're moving in the right direction, because I think in the February 2017 GAO report, in the 2018 GARD report to Congress and then a 2018 GAO report on OCI, timeliness came out as an issue. The timeliness of the investigations wasn't where we needed it to be. And so I think we're interested in making sure you have the resources you need to do these investigations in a timely manner. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to both of you today. And I will actually be following up on the questions about timeliness. General Wilkinson, my questions sort of follow up as well on the conversations that you and I had yesterday. And I appreciate the chance to have spoken to you yesterday to go over some very serious concerns that I've had with ongoing investigations of sexual harassment allegations, as you know, at Horsham Air National Guard Base. Horsham is in my colleague, Representative Madeline Dean's district, and I've been working very closely with her office since June of 2020, speaking to timeliness. We are now, as we all know, in 2022, after receiving an outpouring of rightful concern from my constituents. This case has been plagued by repeated delays, as we talked about in our conversations, and incomplete reporting. And that's been leading many, unfortunately, to conclude that it's simply being slow rolled to the point where demands for any accountability disappear. So I know that you share my commitment to eradicating sexual harassment and assault from the National Guard, sir. And I just wanted to hear your commitment that you'll look into the Horsham investigation and make sure that there is proper oversight and that the investigation itself is concluded without any further and undue delay, sir.
Yes, Congresswoman, and actually I will reach out directly to Major General Mark Schindler, the Adjutant General for Pennsylvania, to get the most current information and get that to your staff immediately. Obviously, time is always of the essence.
Yeah, I very much appreciate it because, as you know, memories fade and people, change places and they're no longer available for people to ask questions of them. And sir, once the investigation is concluded, would you also please commit to me that you would review the report of investigation as well?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Thank you. And my next question is also related, and it's for General Walker as well. I was very interested in your opening statement and your testimony, and you spoke quite extensively about the purpose of OCI and the origins of OCI. And so to the extent that you're able to share, I'd like to understand a little bit more about OCI's process for initiating an investigation. Because again, in August of 2020, Representative Dean sent a request to OCI to have them look into the complaints at Horsham. And the OCI responded and said that after reviewing the request, that they had determined that the most appropriate avenue for the investigation was the Pennsylvania National Guard, even though there were very high-ranking officers within the Pennsylvania National Guard who were named in many of these complaints. So the denial from OCI didn't really offer us very much detail, and I was hoping you might be able to offer any insights as to why OCI declined to take up the Horsham case.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. And again, OCI has a very limited portfolio. We deal with sexual assault cases only. The information that, as I know, and of course I was not there, I did not read the initial request, but as best I can tell, it would be a request that would not be within our ability to investigate because we only do sexual assault. The allegations at Horsham were more of the harassment type. And just to back up a little bit to your question about OCI and how we intake and kind of the process that was involved, we, as I said, we only deal with sexual assault. If there are other issues going on, and oftentimes there are other areas of misconduct happening, the states are often run concurrent investigations with an OCI investigation. We are limited to just the sexual assault aspect. If there's other aspects such as harassment, that goes into the process that's already established that starts within the states. And so I think there was some confusion initially. OCI is very limited. At that time, OCI was about to be broken off into a separate directorate. And one of the things that OCI had been credited with were comprehensive assessments, such as what happened in Wisconsin, which you may be aware of.
And sir, if it's okay, if I might interrupt, because I know I have very limited time, and I sort of anticipated that might be what what was the qualifier there? And you mentioned in your remarks that OCI is not a criminal, but rather an investigative group. And you mentioned that it was only responsible for sexual assault rather than harassment. But interestingly enough, every time we've been talking about the issues of this hearing, we've talked about assault and harassment together. And so it seems as though there really is kind of a gap in coverage that's going on, possibly in OCI's mandate. And I'm wondering whether or not it might make sense to investigate whether we should be broadening the purview of OCI so that there also is that sort of sexual assault and harassment, because it seems as though all of our training is encompassing of all of that. All of the casework tends to be encompassing of all that. And it just seems like that there may be a gap in coverage there.
Well, Congresswoman, it's not a gap in coverage. Historically, harassment and assault within the military had gone down two separate tracks. Harassment was never a criminal offense, whereas assault was always a criminal offense. So over the years, they've developed into separate tracks. As you know, the active force under Title 10, the UCMJ is undergoing changes that will make harassment probably a criminal act as well. So the National Guard.
Actually, the gentlewoman's time has expired.
Sure, I know. I apologize, Madam Chair, and I will yield back. My time has expired, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with you. And thank you so much for the time.
So, Brigadier General, just for your advocation, it was in the NDAA. It is now an offense under the UCMJ, sexual harassment. The gentleman from Texas is now recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spear and Ranking Member Gallagher for holding this hearing today. I also want to thank General Hokanson and General Walker for testifying. I believe this is the first hearing in this subcommittee since Chairwoman announced her retirement. I want to extend a warm congratulations to Chairwoman Spear for her dedication to this subcommittee and wish her all the best in her next endeavor. We are here to have an important discussion regarding the prevention and response of sexual assault in the military. I have a bill, the Service Member Safety and Security Improvement Act, was signed into law last month as part of the FY22 NDAA. Incidents of sexual harassment are not necessarily isolated incidents. If not addressed, they can lead to other serious and sometimes deadly outcomes, sometimes start with the service member going missing. The Service Member Safety and Security Improvement Act will help address this issue by requiring military installations to review and improve policies and procedures for reporting service members missing. This includes partnering with local and federal law enforcement to promote information sharing to ensure all persons and organizations on a military installation are accounted for. General Hokanson, one area where I want to work with you is to find a way to implement some of these best practices for information sharing with local and federal law enforcement for the National Guard. The NDAA required a report from the Department on the feasibility of implementing this legislation with regards to facilities of the National Guard. General Hokanson, what are your thoughts on implementing this type of legislation with respect to the National Guard, and when do you expect that this committee will receive this report?
That's right. I strongly support that. Anytime any of our guardsmen, although, obviously we see them on our drill weekend or an annual training or additional training periods, anytime we don't have accountability for any of them, it is a significant concern for us. So anything that we can do to have resources available to track down or find out really the health and welfare of these individuals as quickly as possible is something that we would absolutely support.
Thank you, sir. I hope we see the report on that in the near future. I look forward to working with you on this. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Escobar, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and many thanks to our panelists here today. To our panelists, I want to give you some perspective on the questions I'm about to be asking. I am the proud representative for Fort Bliss, Texas, here in Congress, and I am also the proud representative of the safe and secure community of El Paso, which is right on the U.S.-Mexico border. And this is the first hearing that we've been able to have with the National Guard since some really alarming reports have been made public. And I know that our subcommittee's focus for the hearing today is around sexual assault, sexual harassment, and I'm very proud of the work that we have done under the chairwoman's leadership to place and prioritize the safety and welfare of our service members, really making it paramount for this committee. And it is with that same perspective in mind that I'd like to ask our National Guard leadership some questions about this, because I know we are all committed to the readiness of our service members. There have been some deeply alarming reports coming out of Texas. We have a deployment of Texas National Guard through an operation called Operation Lone Star, headed by Texas Governor Greg Abbott. I'm hoping for a separate hearing around some of the really alarming reports about increased suicides, deplorable living conditions, lack of full pay, et cetera. And it is my hope that this subcommittee and our committee as a whole approaches these issues in the same bipartisan manner that we have approached sexual harassment and sexual assault. With that, General Hokanson, I'd like to ask you a couple questions just to clarify. Can you please describe the relationship the Bureau and the National Guards of each state have, and in what ways does that relationship hinder the Bureau's ability to exercise full oversight investigations and prosecutions?
So, Congressman, when we look at our relationship, so we work very closely with all of the 54 and communicate, as I mentioned before, on a very regular basis to make sure that they are in compliance with all of the service requirements, both within the Army and the Air Force. And when there's a gap, we try and fill that through Chief of the National Guard Bureau instructions or also policies. And so when we look at the states almost as subordinate, well, they are commanders of their National Guard responsible for them. And what we do is we stay in constant communications to help identify any issues or concerns they have and see if we can help them address those. In addition, because we work with all 54, if we see best practices in one state, we try and share those across the entire organization so that we can make the organization better and learn from others as we go forward. But ultimately, we work with them to make sure that they are in compliance with everything that needs to be done with respect to the services. And then we assist them in any way that we can on literally a daily basis.
Thank you so much, General. The National Guard troops deployed on Governor Greg Abbott's Operation Lone Star are operating primarily under state active duty status. And while those reports of what is known are really deeply alarming, I am also concerned about what is not yet known, what may not be public, including concerns that I have around conditions that might further sexual harassment and sexual assault as well. Are there mechanisms that the Bureau can use to conduct investigations, oversight, and prosecutions of these missions when our service members have been subjected to really alarming and shocking conditions such as those under Operation Lone Star?
So, Congressman, in this case, when we hear reports like that, we take every single one very seriously. And we reach out to the leadership within that state to ask if they need help with anything or where they're finding shortcomings. And we always try and do everything we can to support them. Specifically to that, though, I would like to hand it over to General Walker to add some potential legal implications to that on what they can do to help.
Thank you, sir. And so this is one of those issues where I think the National Guard, we have to be very specific in, obviously the status of each member is important in how and when the National Guard intervenes and at what levels. And that, I think, is the threshold issue that we run into every time there's an issue with guardsmen in how and what the Bureau can do. With respect to sexual assault and sexual harassment, we are constantly looking to inform the states and inform leadership on those things that are specifically triggering the environment which makes sexual assaults most likely to happen. And through analytics and basic information that we're gleaning from our reports, we're actively passing that information on to the adjutants general such that when we deploy, if that's a trigger, we can address those situations where leadership can remove those things from the environment so that we can hopefully reduce and mitigate those factors that contribute to sexual assault. So every time we have an incident now, we are taking great pains to pull data and to analyze those facts so that we can replicate best practices across the 54, particularly in situations that are common to us, such as deployments and
Brigadier
other
General,
endeavors in which
the gentlewoman's time has expired. Can you wrap up your comments, please?
General, my office will circle back with you. I want to sound the alarm, Madam Chair, and to our panelists and to my colleagues, and it is my hope that we can address all of this in the same bipartisan spirit that we have worked in the past in our subcommittee. Thank you all so much. I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. McLean, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to thank you all for being here today. As a member of this committee who has a National Guard base in their district, it really saddens me that sexual assault is all too common in our National Guard. And I want to assure all of you that, and to all of my colleagues on this committee, that I am committed to rooting out this problem. We have to address it. We have to put systems and processes in place to do better. My question is this, General Hokanson, while I'm dedicated to ensuring our National Guard provides a safe and secure way for victims to come forward, which is critical, so we can catch and prosecute the perpetrators of sexual violence. The only concern that I really have is that we create that we're not creating a system that is guilty until proven innocent. So I want to make sure that the pendulum doesn't swing too far the other way. And while I appreciate the Independent Review Committee's recommendation for the Guard, the recommendations seem to be heavily focused on prevention rather than any for actual processing or investigation of potential crimes. And there is a very important piece. Prevention, yes, is critical and is extremely important, but we also have to have an actual process for investigation. Can you explain to me how the process for both the victim and the accused will navigate through the IRC's proposed systems?
Congresswoman, thank you. And our process right now, so obviously the default is immediately to go to local law enforcement to determine whether or not they will take the case, do the investigation, or prosecute. And once that is determined, if it stays in local law enforcement, it stays with them. If they, for some reason, do not take the case, that's where we provide an additional avenue for those individuals to pursue through administrative means through OCI. And so when I look at the victim, obviously the first thing to do and I'll just take it from the role of the commander, is to make sure that they report this immediately within 24 hours and they get a victim advocate for the victim. And from there, the commander has various tools at his or her disposal. A couple of those is to do an expedited transfer of the member out of that organization. They can also do a civilian or military protective order, and they can also initiate a flag on the accused personnel file just so that folks are aware that there is an ongoing investigation. But we're very clear that we want to make sure that everyone is given due process throughout this process. And what I'd like to do now is hand it over to General Walker to talk about the specifics of that, because many of the time the rules enter his purview from there. So Chuck?
Thank you, sir. So again, the National Guard, without military criminal investigative organizations to initiate a criminal investigation, we immediately refer that to local law enforcement. After the local law enforcement investigation is complete, and if it is appropriate, we will conduct an administrative investigation. And I think it's important, oftentimes we see in the media and in other accounts where people are not happy with the results of an administrative investigation because we have very limited remedies for criminal activities. We can discharge a member, but there is no incarceration, there's no registry as a sex offender, there's none of the other institutional controls that our society deems important for sex crimes.
So, sir, can I back up for 1 second?
Yes.
Is there a show, when you turn it over to the local law enforcement agencies, there is I'm trying to think of the word and it's escaping me. There is a for cause hearing, correct?
Well, it depends on the jurisdiction. So the process, again, is for, unlike under a uniform process under the UCMJ, each jurisdiction is going to determine exactly how that investigation and ultimate prosecution of that case, if it makes it there, will happen. So we have no visibility on what happens once we turn it over, which is part of what is the intent on active duty, to take it out of the hands of commanders to an unbiased.
So, sir, in the
entity
interest
that
of
can
time,
investigate.
it would follow the normal chain, the normal prosecution as a normal civilian would, because you're taking it out of.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, sir. I have 1 second, so I appreciate your time, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Jacobs, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. General Hokanson, I was pretty alarmed to hear that you have not fully implemented even one of the recommendations the IRC report highlighted. In light of that, I wanted to follow up on another report, a 2017 GAO report. That report recommended the Chief of the National Guard Bureau reassess the Office of Complex Administrative Investigations timeliness and resources to determine how to improve the timeliness of processing sexual assault investigations involving members of the Army National Guard and identify the resources needed to improve the timeliness of these investigations. Has such a deliberate and thorough reassessment happened? And if so, what has been done to improve the speed of OCI investigations? I bring this up because my colleague, Ms. Houlihan, brought up the importance of timeliness about a specific case, but it seems, at least according to GAO, this is a broader issue that has plagued OCI for some time.
Congresswoman, thank you. And so when I became the Chief of the National Guard Bureau in late 2020, one of the first things I did was sit down with our general counsel and look at OCI. And this kind of goes back to my opening statement that I, like many others, was frustrated. We seem to put a lot of time and effort into this, but it never really seems to move the needle in a positive direction. And so when I spoke with the adjutants general, and this really goes to them understanding just how important of an issue this is, I told them, I said, look, we have a backlog. The way to address that backlog is we need more investigators so that we can get more folks out to the field to complete these investigations. And working with them, as General Walker mentioned, I was able to increase the number of investigators by 60%. And that was through the adjutants general identifying folks within their formations that had the capability to serve as investigators. And that allowed us really to get at this backlog, because it's really unacceptable for extended timelines. And part of that we were able to resolve. And General Walker, frankly, has done admirable work related to that. The other thing that we found when I looked at OCI is under the General Counsel's office, it was really a subordinate organization. And I felt one way to show the entire National Guard just how important this is to create a standalone organization and put a general officer in charge. And thankfully, we have folks in our formations like General Walker, who is also a federal judge, who really took that organization, looked at the entire process, streamlined it, and then was able to get his investigators, not just here in DC, but regionally, so they could travel quicker to a lot of these locations. And I don't want to steal General Walker's thunder, but Chuck, if you'd like to add a lot of the great work that you have done with the team to help.
Well, thank you, sir. And really, I think General Hokanson is hit the essence. Attention to the problem is what General Hokanson has brought to the Office of Complex Investigations. And I will tell you, everyone talks of timeliness, but I want us to think about the National Guard and what we're doing. We've got a force that's 75 to 80% part-time. We are a full-time investigative capability, but we also depend on the Victims Counsel, the Defense Counsel, and the state to have the witnesses available when we do an investigation. Oftentimes, we're limited to drill periods, which happen once a month. So for National Guard, 3 days is actually 45 days equivalent, given the availability of our witnesses and the availability of us to get on site to do investigations. So it's inherent in what we do that our timelines don't match what you may see on active duty or elsewhere in the military because of the unique nature of National Guard service, which we may not have control over individuals that we need to question until we show up for drill. And so one of the factors that we'll never be able to fully address is how long it takes in some instances to start an investigation. And secondarily, those resources, either victims counsel or defense counsel, are limited as well. So we have to coordinate all these other stakeholders with each investigation. And so I have to point that out, that it's not as easy as us just saying we're going to leave tomorrow and do an investigation. It is incredible what our investigators do in order to coordinate these trips. And then, oh, by the way, we're in a pandemic and COVID airline issues. To get an investigation to go from start to finish is a complicated process. So we're doing everything we can to remove those barriers through cross-functional communication. And we are seeing dramatic decreases in the timeliness, but we will never be as fast as we want to be just by nature of the National Guard.
And General Walker, I appreciate that. And in my 5 seconds remaining, I just want to say it brings up an important point that I don't believe National Guard service members get the same level of care as active duty service members, in part because of these limitations of immediate transfer. So just want to make sure we are giving our National Guards members the care that they deserve. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. I see Mr. Fallon is somewhere. Do you?
Yes, ma'am.
You are next on the agenda if you are inclined to ask questions. You're recognized.
Yes,
for 5
Madam Chair,
minutes.
thank you. Thank you so much and very gracious of you. I appreciate it. My question for General Hokanson, how do we reconcile a state's code of military justice with the UCMJ?
So, Congressman, when we look at that, because there are changes to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, each of the states that have a state code of military justice may or may not make changes as quickly as those adjust. And so we really rely on our OCI as they go out to investigate to really look at the state code of military justice and how it applies. So if we go back to the administrative investigations, there are some states that will utilize that as the means to start potentially a court martial, but not all states are like that. And so we really rely on Chuck and his team when they go to a state to do an investigation to make sure that they're aware of that state's specific code so that they know what the leadership, what options that they have once they receive the results of that investigation. And Chuck,
General,
anything?
Yeah, I'm sorry for interrupting. Are there any discrepancies which you think need to be addressed?
Congressman, I'm not sure I can answer that specifically because of the basically the rate at which some of these change. For us, if we have concerns, and as mentioned previously, if an article comes up or there's an accusation, we try and reach out to that state immediately to see, hey, is there anything we can help? Any resources that you need or guidance that you're lacking to help make sure we fill gaps in any areas to make sure that we're doing the right thing for our guardsmen and women.
Well, General, I have another question, but before I get to that, I just want to make sure I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I think that your leadership is really helping dramatically address this problem, and it's very much appreciated. And to what my colleague just before me mentioned, we want to ensure that our Guard troops aren't treated as second-class soldiers in any regard, and that's upon us. That's incumbent on us to do what we can from our level. That's why I supported the equity in hazardous pay for National Guard troops. But another question, real quickly: the SHARP program, obviously, as you know, is an annual training requirement for the National Guard soldiers. But with so few drill weekends, how do we ensure that this is a substantive event instead of more of a check in the box kind of thing?
So, Congressman, I thank you for that question, because one of the things that we came up with our joint task force that looked at this is a lot of the training that they receive is really focused on Title 10, but almost all of our work is done in a Title 32 condition, and that's where we get involved. And so what we've been trying to do is look at ways, and one of the proposals is to create our own course for the National Guard to be taught at our Professional Education Center in Arkansas and some of our regional training institutes. And I actually yesterday saw the 6-day program under which they really want to tailor that training so that it's universal for both Army and Air Guard, but really addresses the unique Title 32 characteristics of the environment that we operate in. To your point, to make sure that when they're there on those limited times with their soldiers and airmen, that they get taught specifically to the environment that they're operating.
And General, with the time I have remaining, can you give us some examples of maybe some best practices that you've seen from some states addressing the sexual assault problem?
Yes, Congressman. And so when I look at a recent, an assistance visit we gave to the state of Wisconsin, and so this was a result of issues that were identified there a few years ago. And so one of the things that we did is set up a roadmap in coordination with the state on key indicators and things that they could do to get to the point where they had really addressed all of those. And these went from looking at a risk assessment of individual events. One of the things that came up from another state as well is really looking at a risk assessment of any time alcohol is at a unit function, and are all the things in place there to help identify and mitigate the potential causes for an environment where sexual assault or sexual harassment may occur. We also identified that there are some things in the Army with their indicators where it's in the Army National Guard, but not the Air National Guard. And so one of our proposals is to share that with the Air National Guard as well, because it really provides an anonymous ability for individuals to provide input and identify things that they may see that may cause these risk factors to be present.
Thank you, General. Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. To follow up on Mr. Fallon's question, General Hokanson, the Wisconsin National Guard had 33 sexual assault cases. Those cases were chosen not to be undertaken by the local district attorney. No action was taken, and an investigation within Wisconsin found that the victims didn't get any resources, and Wisconsin has not updated its state military law as it was expected to do. Now, the U.S. government provides $26 billion a year to National Guards across this country. $26 billion. My understanding is that your authority is one of encouraging, cajoling, subtly hoping that they will do the right thing. But outside of giving them money, we don't have any hook to get them to do what they should do. So in the case of Wisconsin, where they haven't even changed their military code when they were required to do so, and there are 33 cases over the course of 5 to 6 years, some very current, that were not pursued, and OCI has this kind of bizarre function, and there is not accountability. What should we do? Doesn't sound like you have anything but persuasion on your side. At what point do we freeze the money, or at what point do we say, you need to follow the UCMJ or you won't get the money?
So Chair Spear, in this case, when you look at Wisconsin and the accusations that were made, and the governor did make leadership changes when these were identified within their organizations. And we provided an assistance team to Wisconsin to really take a look at every aspect of what occurred.
Excuse me, General, I'm asking you a very specific question. Do you have any power?
Chair Spear, I think I have all the authorities I need to work with the states to make sure that they follow the service guidance that they're given.
But if they don't, it's up to the governor in a state, and in the state of Wisconsin, but for the journalists who brought these cases to the attention of the public, I don't know that anything would be done. And I think all of us here want to make sure that our National Guard service members have the same protections under the law. So if and they become federalized in time of war or when needed. So I really think that we have more work to do here. Let me ask you about the issue with alcohol. So I guess there's no prohibition of using alcohol on those exercise weekends. Is that right?
Usually, ma'am, not during training. These would be in unit functions after hours.
All right. How do you ensure that each state tag is properly investigating sexual harassment and sexual assault?
So with respect to sexual assault, ma'am, that they would actually not be able to do the investigations because commanders are permitted from using their resources to do that. And so they are really reliant on local law enforcement to do those investigations. And as we mentioned before, if local law enforcement decides for some reason not to do that, then OCI is the administrative avenue that we have to help support the states to do those investigations.
Yeah, but if the tag does not refer it, it doesn't get investigated. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so there's a huge problem here. And in many respects, what's going on in the National Guard is what went on in the military when it was up to the chain of command to make a determination as to whether or not to pursue a sexual assault case. And we found out that for a number of reasons, they chose not to do that. And a tag who has a number of sexual assault cases that occur under their command become loath to report them or seek assistance of OCI for fear that it might reflect poorly on them. And sometimes they are the assaulters. So I've got some serious concerns. It's $26 billion that we dole out every year to these states, and we have no control, no authority to protect those National Guard service members if the state chooses not to. I'll now yield to Mr. Gallagher if he has further questions.
I have no further questions.
Let's see, who is next? Ms. Houlihan is no longer here. Ms. Escobar, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I'd like to circle back with General Walker because General Hokanson had asked that General Walker respond to what legal options the National Guard Bureau would have in the cases such as those I've outlined under Operation Lone Star and those cases that the chair has outlined also as an example. If there is a governor who continues to ignore the health, safety, and welfare of the National Guard specifically and has not rectified the situation, and I'm talking about lots of different egregious offenses that we've seen in Texas, what are to General Walker, what are the legal options available to the National Guard Bureau?
Well, Congresswoman, let me start with kind of addressing what happens when a sexual assault is reported.
And General Walker, let me interrupt you, my apologies, but I'm not talking about sexual assault, sexual harassment in particular. This is a much more general question.
Congresswoman, to address that general question would definitely exceed the scope of why I'm here today. I can tell you that in order for the National Guard to exert control over the state in a non-federalized status is an ongoing issue of debate. And as you've seen in other areas that are going on right now, it's a subject of actual litigation as to what the National Guard's authorities are. And the reality is that we work with the states wherever we can to address issues when they're brought to our attention. And from a as someone who came from the field, so that's a nuance. I've only been at Guard Bureau for a year in this role, but I was a state guardsman in leadership in a state. And I can tell you that the intent always is to comply with the service directives and to work with National Guard Bureau in the role of assistance in order to meet those requirements. The actual legalities of what we can do, those are questions well above my scope here. But I can tell you that the issues, when they're brought to attention, we sit down, and as I've seen when I was on the other side, Guard Bureau, General Hokanson and staff work with the states to find solutions to these hard problems. And again, everything that we address starts with an impartial investigation from my standpoint in OCI. If we're bringing it back down to sexual assault, that we provide that information to the states, they take it, and then they use it in order to make themselves better. So I know we have problems. I know there are issues, but the working relationship between Guard Bureau and the states is quite positive. And under General Hokanson's leadership, I think it's the best it's been in a long time. So these problems, there are solutions, and it's called collaboration and working through some of the problems as far as authorities by cooperating with each other, because we all have the same good intent to solve these problems.
Thank you,
and
General
let
Walker.
people survive.
Thank you, General Walker. I have one last question for you before my time expires. Is the Office of Complex Investigations aware of the conditions of the Guardsmen deployed at our southern border?
Well, Congresswoman, that would totally be beyond our scope. Again, we only come into play when an adjutant general requests an investigation. We don't actively seek information outside of that role of investigating specific cases.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, we thank General Hokanson and Brigadier General Walker for your time and attention today. There are a number of requests we've made. We look forward to receiving your answers in due time. Thank you. Committee is adjourned.